Welcome, everyone, to the Hockey Debates podcast. Today's topic, of course, as it is every week, is This Week in NHL Betting. And I'm joined, as always, by my esteemed colleagues, Kevin Allen, the Hall of Fame hockey writer from USA Today, and Sascha Paruk, the lead oddsmaker from sportsbettingdime.com. And we'll get right into the news of the day. Bill Peters is no longer the coach of the Calgary Flames. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, Kevin. Are you maybe a little surprised that it took a couple of days for the hammer to come down?
Well, no, but I'm not, because Brad Treliving's reputation as a guy that's very thorough in his approach and everything, and I think he's actually been commended around the league for he just did a knee-jerk reaction. He actually did a thorough investigation, and I think the result of a resignation is probably best for everyone, particularly for Bill Peters. There's no way he could have come back, and to wait for it to be fired. He just took a preemptive strike, or it was discussed with management. You can either be fired or you're going to resign, and he chose to resign. But given the circumstances of what happened a decade ago, and the fact that it was immediately corroborated, like TSN did all of the investigation for the Flames by finding players who said, yeah, I was there, and that's exactly what happened. And then having Michael Jordan, the former Carolina Hurricanes player, coming forward and saying he was physically attacked by Peters, that just added to it. And he just couldn't remain. There are certain things you can be forgiven for. This is not one of them. And there's no statute of limitation on when you discover what he did years ago. That says a lot about his character. So I think this was a foregone conclusion as soon as it came out that he was going to be gone.
Yeah, I'm amazed it actually took so long. I don't know what the delay was. There was no disputing of the evidence and of the facts. And as you said, it was really an unforgivable thing to do in this day and age. So the only thing that surprised me there is that it took about 48 hours.
Of course, a week ago we were on here talking about a prop bet that Bovada had out on who would be the next coach to be fired in the NHL, or to be let go, or to leave his position, I guess technically was the term. And Bill Peters wasn't among the top favorites. He was on the list, but none of us are Nostradamus. We didn't know this was going to happen. This hellfire and damnation that's come forth in the past week or so with Bill Peters. But we were all touting him as a likely guy based on the fact that he worked in a Canadian market and the team was going south. And, at plus 1,000, it was a pretty good value bet. And you think anybody listened to us, Sascha?
I sure hope so. And that's actually one of the other reasons why I was surprised by how long it took, was because it seemed like the perfect time to fire him, given how poorly the Flames have been playing. And now you have, if you want to be cynical about it, a perfect excuse. So that was another reason why I was kind of shocked by how long it took for the hammer to come down, or really for him to actually step down at the end of the day, as Kevin noted.
Is this going to be kind of like hockey's Me Too movement, Kevin? Do you think we're going to see more players coming forward and more coaches getting caught in the crossfires here?
Yeah, I do, because historically, when you look at things of this nature, that's what happens when someone steps forward and inspires others, to tell their story and to talk how they've been wronged. And I don't know that it's been widespread. I would guess, just based on having covered the league for so long, that what goes on in the NHL mirrors society, and there's, I'm sure, a percentage of people in society that treat people poorly in the workplace, and I'm sure the NHL has similar type statistics. That's the way it generally works. So we've already started to hear a player say, "Hey, look, this is what happened to me," and I think I don't think it's going to be widespread, but I think we'll hear of a couple, and I wouldn't be shocked if the NHL takes some kind of action, maybe opens up discussions about things, hotlines for players to call, something of that nature, that will give them a chance to, come forward without, because that's one of the issues that I think came up with this with Akeem Alou, is that, people have said, well, why didn't he bring this out 10 years ago? Well, it's easy to understand why he didn't. He was a first-year pro who had already been cast as a malcontent because he didn't go along with the initiation rights of a junior team, and he just didn't feel comfortable. He thought his career, would be undermined by coming forward, and in fact, it was by staying silent because Bill Peters, had him moved anyway. So you can understand why he didn't do it. So I wouldn't be shocked if the result of all this is that there's going to be a way for players to anonymously, perhaps, be able to call a hotline with, the leagues that they're in to report to, issues that, perhaps wouldn't put them in a bad light. So hopefully some good can come of this, whatever that is, because mostly it's been really just a bad negative story about pro hockey, even though, again, I don't believe that it's widespread.
We're obviously talking about NHL betting here, Sascha. The Flames have been basically sinking in the odds to win the Stanley Cup all season long because of their poor play. How do you think at all this will impact them? Are they just a train wreck that can't be saved, or is there reason now to look at them as a contender again?
I think they're just as big a contender as they were at the start of the season, which I wouldn't put them up there in the top 5, but I certainly see them in the top half. We talked about this last week, where the sort of underlying numbers for the Flames, their possession metrics, their shot metrics are pretty good, and they're getting better goaltending than most people expected. It's just you have elite snipers like Johnny Gaudreau, Sean Monahan squeezing the stick way too tightly, and that's something that I see regressing to the mean over the rest of the year. And then when it comes to a coaching change, you tend to get a little bit of I don't think dead cat bounce is quite the right word for it, but you tend to get some improved play, at least out of the gate. You've certainly seen it from the Maple Leafs since replacing Mike Babcock with Keefe. And I would not be surprised if the Flames turned their little 2-game win streak into 3 or 4 right now, and saw their both their divisional odds and their Stanley Cup odds rebound to some extent going forward.
And it's easy to understand, Bob, as you know why that occurs, because in the NHL, playing time is everything, and coaches can control playing time. So whenever you get a new coach, everyone's on their best behavior, trying to show what they can do, trying to change the perspective that the coach may have on them. So you have players making fewer mistakes, and usually the team plays better defensively, because that's one area where a coach can have an impact. And I think the Flames will just treat this not as a coach that was thrown out for bad behavior, but as a coach who lost his job because the team wasn't going well. And I don't even think they'll take into account why he was fired. I think they'll just see this as kind of a cleansing breath. Everybody will take a deep breath, and we'll start again. And I could see them going on a run, just like Sascha said.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the inner dynamics of their dressing rooms, but given what we've heard about Bill Peters lately, you'd have to think there are a number of players in that dressing room who are breathing a little more easily today than they were yesterday, knowing that he's not behind the bench, potentially kicking them in the back.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
And we've certainly seen in recent years, when you look at St. Louis last season, and Pittsburgh when Mike Sullivan came in a few years back, both mid-season replacements, so Craig Berube in St. Louis last year, won the Stanley Cup. Now that's the extreme, but it used to be pretty rare, but now that's twice it's happened in the last 4 years. So obviously, the coaching thing the dynamic seems to be a little different today than it used to be, Kevin.
Well, for sure. But and especially nowadays where it's more difficult to make trades. I don't like it when GMs say that you can't make a trade in this salary cap world, because Jim Rutherford and David Poile make them all the time. But it is more difficult. So in the old days, in the 1950s, we used to see big trades. And trades, a lot of trades during the season, and that would to try to get the team moving in a different direction. But it's harder to do that now with the salary cap. because you got to make it match up the dollars and so forth. So the easiest thing to do is to change the coach, and that does obviously have an impact. So that's why we've seen so many coaching changes, and we've seen that, just as you pointed out, success come from those midseason changes. And even some teams that don't win the cup, they play pretty well with the new coach. So this won't be the only coaching change we see, I'm sure, this season during the season.
Today I wanted to also discuss an aspect of sports betting that's still relatively new. It's called live betting or in-play betting. I covered a lot of horse racing in my day, and I remember the days before simulcasting became big in racing, and the biggest complaint was there's just not enough action. When you go to the track, there was only maybe 12, 15 races at the most, and people wanted something to do. You usually had 20 minutes between a race, and that kind of led to simulcasting. And it seems kind of to me like live betting is very similar to that. And when you bet on a sporting event in the past, once the game started, you just sat there and waited to see what the outcome was going to be for the next 2-3 hours. But now live betting, you can keep betting on that game right through to the final buzzer. Maybe, Sascha, you're the betting expert amongst the three of us. Maybe kind of explain the evolution of live betting, and it certainly seems to be the fastest growing aspect of sports betting today.
Yeah, it absolutely is, because there is a lot of demand for it. As you mentioned, people want to be able to bet on a lot of different aspects of the game, particularly as fantasy sports has grown. Live betting capitalizes on a lot of similar things like that, where you can bet on player props in game, team props in game, and it delivers sort of the instant satisfaction that, let's be honest, sort of degenerate sports bettors love and live for. And so live betting is certainly exploding, and has exploded over the last couple of years, and is only going to get bigger and bigger. There are a couple things that I think people should know before they start live betting on hockey, on all sports. But since we're focusing on hockey, let's focus on hockey here. Number one is that with live betting, there tends to be higher juice than with pregame betting. So what that means is, if you had a two-way odds for, let's say, this ongoing Bruins versus Rangers game, and let's pretend for the time being that it was a pick'em game, so you would have had both teams generally at around -110. If you're betting that same proposition right after the game starts, you're usually going to see at most sports books closer to -120. So that means you're going to have to bet $120 to win 100 instead of $110 to win 100. So while live betting is very convenient and does offer that sort of instant gratification, it's very common to see higher juice, which means you have to bet more money to win the same amount on in-game propositions, when if you could have bet on the same proposition pre-game, you could have got it at a better number, we would say. We'll start with that.
Yeah, I think live betting feeds into the way people watch the game, though. How often when you've been with friends watching a hockey game, and for example, when it goes into overtime, somebody will say, "Who do you got in overtime?" That's the way people view it. And before the game starts, somebody will usually say, "Who's going to score the game-winning goal?" That just seems to fit the way we kind of watch hockey games as well. And, the first power play, you think in those terms. And, I think the hockey fan mentality is almost perfect for live betting.
And it seems to also be just the way people operate in their daily lives now. Like when you used to watch the game, you just watch the game on TV. Now you're watching the game on TV, you got your phone going, texting with people, you've got social media up on your laptop, you're multitasking as you're watching the game, and it just seems like, live betting fits right into that mold, the way people kind of operate today. So I'm going to look at a couple of hockey stats here. I was looking up some numbers today, and it's one of the nice things about live betting is that there is so much more data available to the average person now than there would have been, say, even 10 years ago. Now, one of the old adages in hockey was the importance of the first goal of the game. I don't think there's another sport where the first score of a game is so vitally. I've never seen a stat on NBA team's record when they score the first basket of the game. I'm sure it's not nearly as significant as who scores the last basket of the game. But I was looking at some of the better teams when they score first this year. Carolina is 11-2 when they score first. Dallas is 12-3. Columbus, surprisingly, is 10-3, a team that's not really playing great this year. And Arizona is 9-2. Now, it used to be in the old dead puck era that you gave up the first goal and you were doomed. It seems like today there's a better chance to come back than that. You think it's just the way the game's played now, Kevin, has made it a little more wide open?
Yeah, particularly this season, there's been a lot of talk about how many comeback victories we've seen. And I think it speaks to, the youth of the NHL. They're going younger, and more importantly, they're going faster. And I think because of that, I think there's, I think I'm seeing more mistakes because you're younger players, and speed also creates a lot of turnovers as well. So, yeah, I think that, I'm happy about this, is that we've moved out of the era of the 1990s neutral zone trap, New Jersey Devils, strangulation, hockey, and we've moved up to a much higher tempo. And I think the rules also has really played a role in changing the way the game is played. The reason why you could hold leads back in the old days was, you could hook and hold. When we went through the rule reformation in 2005, we changed all that. You couldn't hook and hold, and slowly over time that's been erased from the game. And now it's much more difficult to sit on a lead than it was, a decade ago.
Yeah, one of the interesting props that I've bet on a few times is you can bet on in-game over-unders, so the number of goals that are going to be scored in a game. And one of the sort of recent occurrences in the NHL is for teams who are down 2 goals in the third period to pull their goalie with like 3 or 4 minutes left. And so oftentimes I find there is value betting on the over-under to be sort of at least 2 goals scored in the final 10 minutes of a game when there is a 2-goal discrepancy between the two teams. And that's certainly something that's come out of the sort of newer, more wide open style of play.
Another thing that people bet on with live betting is period scores. It's kind of like, I know, like in tennis, if you've got a mismatch of, say, Djokovic is playing the 134th player in the world, Djokovic is going to win, but you can bet on the over-under on the number of games he's going to win it in, and that's a way to make some money, even though it's not a bet you would want to play straight up. And It seems like with hockey, you see there are certain teams that start fast, and there are certain teams that finish better. And knowing your numbers, I think a team like the Detroit Red Wings, who've notoriously been slow starters this year, would be a great bet to go against them in a period bet. So it's no different than regular betting. You got to know your stuff, Sascha, but you've also got to be quick on the trigger finger to make those bets because things change.
Absolutely. That is one frustration that a lot of people find with live betting.
I've lost our connection.
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kevin. Yep. Sasha's disappeared.
Well, one of the points I would bring up is on that, particular thing. Like, if you're paying attention to if teams play back-to-back games, for example, I think anybody who's watched a lot of hockey knows that usually, even when you play back-to-back games, you actually come out pretty strong in that second game in the first period. You're trying to prove to yourself and to your coach, that you still have it. When the weariness shows up is in the second period. Is when I see it. Usually they come out and you're pretty good in that first period. So, if I was a betting man and had to bet, I'd bet on the team playing back-to-back games to be in trouble in that second period more so than in that first period.
It seems another stat that's big in hockey and still seems to hold a lot of water is leading or trailing after 2. And I was looking at some of those numbers, and here's a dramatic one for you. Buffalo is 10-0 when they're leading after 2. They're 0-11 when they're trailing after 2.
Wow.
That's just astonishing to think that, that one goal might make that much difference in what's going to happen to them going into the final 20 minutes.
They should petition the league to only play 40 minutes, and then, why play that third period? It's really useless. It's already settled after 40, one way or the other, So yeah, that's kind of an odd stat, but it is, hockey is much different than other sports in that, even though you can't hold the lead the way you used to, it's still, if you do have a lead going into the third period, I'd favor you winning the game. There's no doubt about it.
Well, Sascha, you're back with us, so why don't you finish up what you're talking
about? Sorry about that.
That's not your power. We don't control technology. We just use it. Go ahead. Tell us what you were talking about earlier about live betting.
I completely forget where I was.
Well, we were just talking about how, you have to be kind of quick on the trigger finger and you have to kind of follow the there's still trends and certainly data that you need to pay attention to when you're live betting, the same as when you're betting before the game. Yeah,
so one major frustration I hear from NFL bettors is how quickly the odds sort of come and go. Anytime a team goes on the power play, oftentimes you'll see the odds on basically every proposition for the game go down for a certain period of time. And usually they come back up pretty quickly. But if you've already tried to make a bet and, there's sort of a 8 or 10 second processing time on the site, and you can have entered your bet and clicked bet now. And while the bet is taking place, the odds go down and the bet won't actually register. And then you have to go back and start again. And you might find that the price for the thing that you were betting on is now significantly shorter or significantly longer. Sometimes it goes in your favor, sometimes it doesn't. But it is certainly one reality that people who are live betting on the NHL have to get used to and have to deal with, is that the lines are going to constantly be changing. They will be available for certain periods of time, then they will be down, and then they will come back. And it's just something that you have to get used to, the sort of ebb and flow. And it's very important not to get too frustrated and start, they say, tilting when something that you tried to bet on comes to fruition without you getting the chance to put your bet down on it. And it's something that I was certainly guilty of when I was a youthful, impulsive bettor. I was live betting one time a Canadiens Flyers game, and they were just going back and forth. It was 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, 3-2, 3-3. And then I tried to bet on the team that was down 1 scoring the next goal, because that is what had happened every single time in that game. And what I described happened to me. I had the bet in, it was processing, line went down, because Montreal scored, because the bet I was trying to make happened. And at that point in time, I just clicked bet when it was back up, even though it was now 3-3. And of course, the Flyers scored the next goal. So do not be impulsive. Do not get frustrated when a bet that you tried to make doesn't actually register.
It does seem like, it's the kind of thing you could get all caught up in, and you, as you say, kind of lose your focus. And, patience is such a huge part of successful betting, and live betting lends itself to, as you say, getting a little over involved and maybe kind of losing sight of the greater goal, which is to end up with more money at the end of the game than you had before the game started.
Exactly.
Another team, you talk about trends, and I think it's important to watch trends whether you're live betting or you're betting pregame. And a team, again, we talked to them earlier about the Red Wings, how they've struggled early. Another thing they've struggled mightily with is they give up a goal and they seem to go right off the rails and give up the next one and then the one after that. So if you're live betting, there's a team, as soon as they get scored on, you might want to be betting on the other team to score the next goal right away. You watch a lot of the Red Wings, Kevin. Is it the injuries, or are they really that bad?
No, they're that bad. It's surprising from the perspective is that Ken Holland, before he handed over the reins to Steve Yzerman, thought this team could compete for a playoff spot. But this is what I would say about that. I think if Holland was still the general manager, I think he would have been pulling all the levers, particularly with regard to the defense, to plug those holes and make that team competitive. Steve Yzerman really hasn't done that. I think he's kind of accepted his fate, and maybe even to the point where, and tanking is such a dirty word, but I think he's totally fine if this Red Wing team crashes and gets yet another premium, prospect, because, it's going to be in the lottery. So I think that's probably the difference between having Yzerman versus Holland. I think if Holland was still there, because he believed that it was time for this team to compete, I think he would have worked a little more aggressively to kind of fix things. And I think Yzerman is content to, bottom out. And this is still part of the process of acquiring good young premium players. And I think Yzerman believes we need to do this for another 2 or 3 years to make sure that they have talent going forward. So I think this team is as bad as it looks. They've got one quality line that when that's going, they're okay. But mostly they're a team that's going to give up a lot of goals.
Speaking of a lot, when you look at some of these sports books websites online, you can be almost overwhelmed with how many live betting options there are. Not every book, but a lot of them offer a plethora of different opportunities. Is there a live betting strategy, Sascha? Should you focus on one specific aspect and follow that along, or
my biggest piece of betting advice for people who are betting on sports of any sort is to only bet on the things that you know. I've tried my hand betting on soccer, went terribly. There is a huge correlation between how successfully I bet and how well I know the thing that I'm betting on. So it's very important for bettors not to go get overwhelmed when they see a menu with 100 different props that you can wager on. If you don't have sort of extensive knowledge about a certain sport or even about a certain area of the game, you've talked about trends, first period scoring trends, second period scoring trends. Unless you have numbers on that give you an educated opinion on what's going to happen, don't bet on it. When the good thing about there being such an extensive menu is that if you spend any time scrutinizing statistics, there's probably something that's going to be in your wheelhouse, something that you have a good feeling about. And so, as I said, my biggest piece of betting advice is do not bet on things that you are not familiar with, that you don't have evidence and stats to back up. And I would also say it's important to know the ramifications of an outcome, how motivated teams will be at certain points in time. This obviously factors in a lot more towards the end of the season than it does at the beginning of the season. And in a sport like college football right now, where we're heading into bowl season and teams are fighting for bowl eligibility, it's very important to know how important the outcome of a game is before betting on it.
I think the biggest thing that's changed betting has been, analytics and advanced stats, and, the metrics that are now available to you, gives you far more information than we had, 10 years ago. And, even to the point where, you can use metrics to know whether or not a team has been lucky or not. That's helpful knowledge as you're moving forward, or you're predicting what's going to happen, next season. Anybody who's going to bet, I think you're doing yourself an injustice if you don't explore all the statistics that are now available to you, because they really give you a full indication of what how a team is performing. Right down to how well their momentum is, and pretty much everything in between. If you look at almost everything that's available to you, you really have a sense of how a team is performing.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's a stat in the NHL called PDO, which is basically what is your shooting percentage and what is your save percentage. Teams that have a very low shooting percentage and a very high save percentage are considered lucky teams. And those are statistics that tend to regress to the mean over the course of the season. But you also have teams like the Islanders who have, for basically a year and a half now, consistently outperformed their PDO. Their results are not necessarily regressing to where you would expect them based on that PDO. And so with a sport like the NHL, it's still, those advanced analytics are not as sort of well formed as they are in other sports, particularly baseball, where we're still learning how exactly will PDO correlate to long-term success. Because now one of the newer statistics is high danger chances. And so it's not just that you're giving up shots or not generating very many shots. That can be a sustainable path to success if the chances, the shots that you're generating are right in front of the net and the chances that you're giving up are off to the side. So it's a very exciting area, I would say, for NHL betting right now.
Well, one prediction I can make with 100% certainty is that we're out of time. The time's flown by again this week. We had another great conversation. Thanks, gentlemen, for a wonderful afternoon of hockey talk, and we'll be back again next week. So we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day.
Thanks, Bob.